the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Let's begin it.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9. I said I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
Listen to this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with money.
But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Let's begin it.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9. I said I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
Listen to this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with money.
But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
to attempt to let's be at it.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9.
Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 271, punished for sticking to the truth. You'll have to excuse the raspy sound of my voice. I'm recovering from strep throat. I got exposed to COVID, so of course I got strep throat instead, because I you can't tell me what to do, damn it. But yeah, so we're having fun tonight. I couldn't talk on Tuesday, but I can talk tonight. Hopefully my voice will hold out for the whole show. But if it doesn't, then we're going to have a short show. So
you sound good. And
that's
you know,
good.
to be fair, like, what, you know, I know you always have, like, a lot of issues with your
allergies
voice.
And stuff.
Allergies. Yeah, but I can almost never tell the difference. Maybe sometimes a little bit, but honestly, you always sound like the same Hannah. Maybe I just love you too much and I'm biased.
Aw, I love you too. You guys are wonderful. We have the best friend group, I swear. But I always sound bad, that's why. But
no, you don't.
You guys are sweet. And in any case, yeah, I'm dealing with post-nasal drip, which is an official sounding way of explaining that tonight I am a snot-nosed brat from hell. So, and that attitude is appropriate tonight, considering what we're going to be reading. So, here we go. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with Nonsense Annihilator, Lauren Brooks, and the personification of perceptivity, Mike Stevenson. And tonight we're going over an egregious abuse in the UK justice system. And we'll make a bit of a comparison to another egregious abuse in the Ohio justice system. But I think the bulk of the show is gonna be about the UK incident because it's its own story, and the Ohio one is too. So you can consider this to be at the outset at least a 2-show discussion already. So, before we get into it, as always, Honey Badger Radio dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions, and as experiences both recent and long past have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They've made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice, or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And if you want to tip us directly, or instead of relying on any social media platform's tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justthetip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find your way to all of our content, as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. And as you've heard us point out in other live streams, perverting the course of justice is a crime when a citizen does it. What is it when the wrongdoing is committed by those tasked with turning the wheels of justice and keeping its course in line? So I actually have like a whole set of articles here that I'm going to be going over. This first one is this is Sky News. This is the BBC. And I think this is the one that I initially saw with regard to this story. And this gentleman, Andrew Malkinso, was convicted, I believe, in 2003. And years later, after he was released, his innocence was discovered. So I'm going to read the first bit of this is like the first thing I read about this case. And then I started digging into it more because of the lack of detail in this story as to what happened specifically with the case. A man whose rape conviction has been overturned after a 20-year fight has said the past 2 decades felt like he had been kidnapped by the state. Andrew Malkinso was jailed in 2004 for the attack on a woman in Salford, serving 17 years in prison for a crime he always said he did not commit. His case was referred to the Court of Appeal in January after new evidence pointed to another potential suspect. So that whole time he maintained his innocence. 20 years he maintained his innocence, and it took that long for new evidence to point to another potential suspect. Mr. Malkinso, 57, said, "I was innocent, and finally they listened. But I have been innocent all along, for each of those 20 years that came before today. It has taken nearly 20 years to persuade my kidnappers to let me go." Overturning his conviction, Lord Justice Holroyd said Mr. Malkinso could leave the court free and no longer be subject to the conditions of license. Police apologized for what they described as a grave miscarriage of justice. So this, just in and of itself, doesn't convey the gravity of what really happened there. Because you know from listening to past episodes of this show and us talking about what what convicted perpetrators of sexual violence are expected to do. And there are therapy programs, and there are there's expectations that they have to meet. They don't just, when they get out of prison, it's they're not out. They're on probation pretty much for the rest of their lives. They have to sign up for a perpetrator list, and their neighbors get told about their conviction everywhere they move. So they're never free. They're just out of the cage, out of the physical cage. And on top of that, the whole time they're in prison, they are essentially mentally manipulated around the concept of their conviction, the crime that their conviction imposes on them, and the idea of rehabilitating from that crime. And this article really didn't capture that, so I started digging. Because I looked at this, and it gave the basics that, you know, he was working as a security guard. He was found guilty following a trial in 2003 and sentenced to life with a minimum term of 7 years. He served a further 10 years after that minimum expired. And his barrister, Edward Henry KC, told the court that this was because Mr. Malkinso would never falsely confess to abhorrent crimes, which he did not commit. So I'm looking into this, and I'm like, there has to be more to this case. You know, like, there's for them to get the wrong guy, they can't have had solid evidence, because solid evidence points to the person that committed the crime, right? So I started looking, I believe it was, and I get into the Guardian article. This is the second article here, I believe on the list as well. But I am sharing my screen So if my co-hosts are watching
Yeah.
that helps.
Yep.
Good.
Yeah.
So I start looking into this a little more, and as I go, this is his reaction here. Right outside the court, Malkinson gave his speech peppered with dignified fury, as is appropriate in my opinion. Normally a softly spoken man, he held nothing back against Greater Manchester Police, whom he branded liars for their role in failing to disclose multiple flaws in the case against him and destroying key exhibits. So there's the smoking gun, right? The big part that hit me was the phrase destroying key exhibits.
Yeah.
That's got to be illegal, surely.
Right?
I mean,
Wait.
this is-
In every conceivable way.
You think about this, right? Imagine, right? You commit a crime, and you get arrested, and in the course of the police investigation, they look into maybe your tax paperwork, and you destroy all of your records. That is a crime. It is illegal for you to do that, even though, even in a country like the United States, where you have the right to not incriminate yourself, and they can ask you, did you commit this crime? And you have the right to not say, yes, sir, I did it, even if you did. But you don't have the right to destroy your tax records so that they can't find evidence of your crime. And you can be convicted of obstructing justice for that, obstruction of justice. And I believe it's perverting the course of justice in the UK, which is why I use that phrase in the opener. So here we have the accusation that not only did they fail to disclose multiple flaws in the case against him, but they destroyed key exhibits. Destroying a key exhibit is a hell of a thing.
And how do you even go about, like, legally going against the police for something like that if you can barely afford to defend yourself?
Yeah.
You know?
I think this is one where there should be, and I don't know what the process is in the UK for this, but there should be a process wherein a judge who rules that this man is innocent has to look at what the police did wrong. And the first thing that stuck out to me was that. The second thing he said, it says, Wednesday's hearing was the first time that the extent of GMP's disclosure failures were made public. They included the fact that the court was never told that a key witness only came forward on the day he was arrested for another crime, and that he was addicted to heroin and had multiple criminal convictions the court was unaware of. So here we have something like this guy was obviously not the only. He's obviously not the only suspect, right? Somebody else has been pointed to. So what did they base it on? There were never any DNA. There was never any DNA linking Malkinson to the crime. So they didn't base it on DNA. His conviction was overturned after new forensic evidence revealed another man's DNA on a sample of the victim's clothing.
And how long did that, is that how long it took? 20 years?
20 years. So if there was no DNA, that says that his conviction had to be based on other evidence, which is all circumstantial.
Right. Evidence or lack thereof.
Right. A key witness would mean an eyewitness, somebody who identified him by sight. So they had a heroin addict say this was the guy. Didn't tell the court the guy was a heroin addict. Didn't tell the court that he only offered to point the finger at this guy after being arrested himself.
Right.
And didn't tell the court about the guy's criminal record. The witness's criminal record. But it's an interesting juxtaposition there. It took DNA to prove his innocence. And he says that DNA proved my innocence, but the other grounds are to me as important, because if it weren't for those terrible failures by GMP, I wouldn't have been convicted. I would have had a fair trial.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, I think that might actually have been the extent from this one. This is, and he's diabetic now. He's got health problems of a like, he's a Gen Xer. Gen X in general has a lot of diabetics in comparison to previous generations. And I think largely because of our diet, but and that's like government guided. But this guy lost his healthiest years.
Yeah.
He lost all of his 40s, part of his 50s. He was in his 30s, I guess, when he went in. Just incredibly irresponsible of the state and egregious abuse. So, The Guardian has another article detailing more of these failings. This is by Emily Dugan. And so we go down to... Okay. Here we find out, now back in the 90s it was common to convict based on like hair samples or bite marks or things like that, because they didn't have the DNA testing capacity that they have today. None of that kind of mistake. It was strictly on witness testimony. And out of all the different types of testimony that a court can use, witness testimony is the least reliable. People make mistakes, they forget things, they have biases, they interpret things. Like the incidents where, there's 2 incidents I can remember news stories about where people tackled a man that they thought was a purse snatcher and took the bag that he was holding on to and gave it to the woman who was the actual bag snatcher, and she got away because they thought that the criminal must be male. And so 2 times there's been news stories about men getting robbed because witnesses, bystanders, intervened in what they thought was a man trying to rob a woman, and they ended up facilitating a woman's robbery of a man. This incident with this guy, the witness being arrested and needing some material to get himself out of trouble, and also being an addict, his memory is questionable, his motives are questionable, and his honesty is questionable. So it says, Malkinson's case was heard in a court of appeal on Wednesday after another man's DNA was found on a fragment of the victim's vest top. At Malkinson's original trial, the court was not told that a key witness was a long-term heroin addict with multiple criminal convictions, or that he only came forward as a witness on the night he was arrested for another crime. The disclosure failure made it possible to present him to the jury as honest and independent, and came despite explicit requests for witnesses' criminal records. Michael Seward had claimed to be driving in the middle of the night with a woman who was also a witness in the case, and whose criminal convictions were also not disclosed to the court. They claimed to have been witnesses to the moments leading up to the rape.
So what they explain. Come on, I need them to explain why they disclosed,
why they made that claim.
Yeah.
Seward came forward just hours after police had approached its sources for information to assist the inquiry to a mobile police station a mile from the road where he was arrested for a driving offense. So now, in the UK, if you speed or otherwise, do in just minor, like misdemeanor moving violations like that, do they arrest you?
I don't quite know. It depends on how closely associated with UKIP you happen to be.
Yeah, there you go. I just like in the US, like if I've been pulled over. I was a teenager. I got pulled over just a few miles per hour short of reckless op. I would call it pretty reckless. It was some pretty dumb behavior. And it was 96 and a 55. So really backcountry road.
Right.
And it was 1990. It was 1991. But I was driving a 10-year-old station wagon, an old Dodge Diplomat station wagon, not made for driving like that. It was made for hauling a bunch of kids to dance class or gymnastics or, midget football or whatever. But in the back, right, or groceries, not speed demon teenager driving on backcountry roads. So it was pretty bad. And I got a ticket, and I was sent home. I was not arrested. I've been in car accidents where the other person did something really stupid. Like one lady came around the corner at 35 miles an hour, didn't even slow down, hit the car I was in so hard that we went airborne and traveled a full car length in the air and landed on the trunk of the car in front of us.
Oh my God.
We were in a Ford Festiva, little bitty tiny car. Like, they're bigger than a smart car, about maybe a little smaller than a Beetle. So they're very small. And yeah, so no arrest there either, right? The only time I've ever heard of anybody being arrested for a driving offense would be, 1, they drove while intoxicated, or 2, they killed somebody with their vehicle. So I would probably bet, given the details of this case, that it's the former, because there's nothing stated in the article about the individual having killed somebody with their vehicle. They probably, if they were arrested and not just issued some sort of a citation for a driving offense, unless the UK is dramatically different from the United States, it was probably driving while under the influence of an intoxicating substance.
Like caffeine.
Well, that's the one thing you're allowed to use while driving. You can have all the caffeine you want in your system. Just, not alcohol. Well, you can have tobacco. Not marijuana, not heroin. Probably not even cocaine. If you have cocaine in your system, they probably
Not
would cite
even
you
with
for
a
driving.
license.
Yep. Nope, not even with a license. I mean, you can't
listen,
drive with alcohol in your system, and you're allowed to drink.
For some people, just eating like a burger behind the wheel is enough of a distraction for them to cause a fucking catastrophic fucking failure on the highway. You know?
Exactly. Well, it's illegal now in Ohio to use your cell phone while you're driving.
Only now?
Yeah, only now. It was stupid to use your cell phone while you're driving. The whole time cell phones have existed, but it's only just now illegal. So, and then there's some people that would not consider it a problem to use their cell phone while driving unless it was illegal, because we've developed this idea that something is not wrong unless the government tells you it's wrong. Like taking stupid chances, duh, don't drive while you're on your cell phone. Even Miss Reckless Op knew that, right? It's a good thing there were no cell phones when I was a teenager. But even when I was a teenager, even if I drove too fast and stuff like that, you didn't see me driving down the street shoving a burger down my throat. Like, I had both hands on the wheel. Which is why I thought I was competent to drive too fast. But this guy probably got arrested that night for driving while intoxicated. So that indicates that the night that he claimed to witness this crime, he was intoxicated while he was supposedly witnessing the time before the crime. So that's what this guy was convicted on. Malkinson was convicted on the word of a man who claimed to have witnessed his presence at a crime scene prior to the crime while the witness was intoxicated.
So, I mean, all right. So surely there was the woman who placed the allegation against him, right? Like, she's the one who is the impetus for this, right? Because if he really didn't do anything, then everybody's just grasping at straws to try to figure out, if this guy did it and who can we find to corroborate her story. And they just so happened to find some reprobate on the side of the street, and no, he says that I totally believe his story. It must be true, and again, if this is just not another way that women get to use men as this is like a form of proxy violence against men. You know what I mean? Because women can just launch an allegation against anyone, and whoever is around that will, white knight for that woman will just stand up and say, oh, I think I might have seen some guy, and it might have looked like that guy that I knew, even if he wasn't there, because his impetus is trying to help and assist, and oh my God, she must be in so much danger, so I've got to step in and say something, because if I don't say something, then nobody else will, and woe is me, and this woman will never get justice for a thing that never happened to her, that I can't even verify, but she said it happened, right?
Well, and
she
then
said it happened, right? Like,
the other thing is, now, it's confirmed that this woman was a victim, but she wasn't able to identify the perpetrator, and that's the issue here. Was they're calling him the perpetrator without proving that he was the perpetrator. In his case, you can go back and look at all of the evidence that was used against him, and it turns out it was basically crap. Well, somewhere in here I have. There's another aspect to this that is just going to piss you off as soon as I find the images. I wonder if it was in the first.
The thing about what you just said is that it really doesn't matter whether or not there's a legitimate claim of victimhood here.
Yeah.
It just doesn't matter.
Not in his case, no. That's there we go. It is in the first article. So I'm going to go back to the first article here. I want to show you something else. Let's see. That's okay. No, I don't want a free BBC account. All right. Can you guys see? There we go. All right. Yep. It keeps so if we pull this up, here we go. The picture on the left is Andy Malkinson. The picture on the right is the e-fit of the suspect. So the victim gave a description, and the description shows this guy on the right with thinner eyebrows, closer set eyes than Malkinson.
Longer nose.
Very long, narrow nose in comparison.
Anyone
smaller
going to
mouth.
mention the slightly blue tint going on?
Yeah, she was obviously raped by a giant Smurf. But yeah, like the jawline is different. Right?
I mean,
the cheekbones are different. The ears are different. Everything is different. The hair is different. Like you can see, he has a receding hairline. in comparison to this guy, like, I wouldn't necessarily look at this guy and say receding hairline if it was just a picture of him by himself. But when you put it next to this other image, yeah, he looks like he's got a receding hairline. He's just got his hair very short.
Yeah, they couldn't possibly look more different. I could probably tell them apart by their skulls.
Yeah.
But I guess they're both white men, so yeah, same person.
Yeah. I noticed the profound absence of glasses in the picture on the right.
Yeah.
I'm like, I just misplaced my glasses this week. Then this year is the first year I have ever been able to like go places and do things in public without my glasses. It's a new experience for me over the last 40 years. And I think a lot of people with glasses, that if they wear their glasses all the time, it's because they have to. And it would be weird for a victim to not notice that the person had glasses.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right? And like, it's rather an odd thing for him to just suddenly be without glasses. And
Also, he's blue. What?
Yeah.
It needs mentioning at least twice. I think it's blue. Sorry.
She was obviously raped by a member of the Blue Man Crew.
It's an avatar.
Yes,
It's an avatar.
It's an avatar. But this just, like, in addition to the eyewitness being drunk or stoned at the time of the alleged crime, when he was supposed to have witnessed this guy, in addition to the fact that the police withheld evidence as to why he might have approached them, in addition to the fact that his credibility is shit, he didn't even look anything like the victim's description of the man. Xeranx gave us $5 and said the artist rendition looks more like Scott Weiland. I don't know who that is.
I don't know who that is either. Sounds like a musician for some reason.
You're one of the X-Men. I think you have a different Scott.
Who's? Oh, wait. Yeah, there is one of the X-Men though. There's some of the X-Men are blue, right?
Yeah.
Cyclops was called Scott. Or was that the actor who played it? None of this matters.
But he wasn't blue. There's two others that I'm thinking of, and I can't think of their names because I'm trying to. If I wasn't trying to think of their names, I would have no problem calling it to mind immediately. Nightcrawler, yes, Nightcrawler is blue. That's who I was thinking of.
Beast.
And
really,
Beast is the other one, but he's a bigger, stronger guy.
Until he was played by a younger man in the films that were based earlier. And by based, I don't mean based.
Right.
Old Beast was played by Kelsey Grammer, i.e. Frasier.
There you
Young
go.
Beast was played by that Nick something, that young British actor who was in Skin. None of this matters.
Right.
There's some serious stuff behind the pop culture nonsense.
Right. But yeah.
Yeah.
Xeranx says he's the guy he referred to as the former lead singer of Stone Temple Pilots. Okay. So basically, we're looking at this now. What we're looking at is a case where there wasn't any evidence that was credible against this guy, and he was still found guilty. Like, no credible evidence. And the only reason that the evidence was viewed as credible was because the police withheld evidence against their witness.
I'm tired of these people, tired of their world, tired of being caught up in the tangle of their lives. To quote Dr. Manhattan, who was also blue.
Yeah. So, both the CPS and the Greater Manchester Police confirmed in May they would not contest a fresh appeal. Well, that's very, very big of them, isn't it? Like, of course they're not going to contest. Police said in January that a man had been arrested and released under investigation in light of the new information, but no decision had been made on whether he will be charged. So they had a guy that didn't look like the description given, that they only had a drunk or stoned eyewitness with questionable motives to point the finger at him, and they worked their asses off to get him convicted. But now that they have DNA, they might not.
I swear, modern police forces work like modern RPGs or something or some kind of multi online multiplayer thing, where your task is to arrest as many people as possible, but some people are worth more points than others. If you can just get someone who said something racist on Twitter, then you'll get 2 points. And this is why most policemen spend most of their time doing the police equivalent of killing boars in the forest. You just kill a boar over and over again. So, because something like a murder is difficult to solve, right? Why would you waste your time solving something like a murder when you can simply find someone on Twitter who says something racist, and then you don't need to solve anything? You can get their IP address, you can go around to their house, you can arrest them, and boom, you've filled in that part of your quota for people arrested.
Yeah.
But
That's the sad truth.
You can still get more points for an arrest if it involves, something serious like an offense against a woman, such as what's going on here. And people are just as corrupt in their desperation to get something that's going to give them a gold star on their score sheet, like rather than just running around arresting Twitter users all day. If they can actually find a rapist, or just a random guy who's got blue, but they can nevertheless convict him of rape, they'll get that big old gold star on their record. The incentives that people are giving to policemen are the problem. It's not the actual police force. It's not the actual police people. It's the incentives they're being given. That's what we should defund. If
the
in
incentives
the event that it's
and,
being funded,
and the training.
and I suspect it is being funded. You know what I mean?
The incentives and the training, because they're sort of being treated like, any man is interchangeable with any other man. You get an arrest, you have a person to satisfy the anger of the community, and you haven't done anything to him. Meanwhile, they consider the woman, the victim, to be broken for life, and her suffering is enough to make it worthwhile for them to throw some guy into jail, even if he did nothing wrong, and torture him for 17 years. And I mean torture, because when you think about it, what did this guy go through, right? 7 years was his minimum. 7 years would have been all he served if he had just said, "Yep, I did it. I was guilty. I confess, and I'll go through your perpetrator program and change my attitude," and bowed his head and just accepted his fate. If he'd have just done that, he'd have been out in 7 years. That was his minimum, right? But he didn't, because it was a lie. He didn't commit the crime, and he wasn't guilty. So he was punished with an extra 10 years. They couldn't call his behavior good because he didn't comply with being ordered to agree that he committed that crime. And let me tell you, having somebody order you to acknowledge something that is not true hurts. It physically hurts. I've been there. I've been in a corporate setting where I have been ordered for it. I've been given an order for reality to be different than it is. You know, everything from, just little lies about our food service to this conversation about your trajectory within the company never happened. And, this incident never occurred, and, all of these safety problems that you deal with every day don't exist, and things like that. It's physically painful to be in a position where you're going to face a consequence for telling the truth on something minor like that, where you're not admitting to doing something wrong. You're admitting to reality being different than it really is around you. That's hard. I can't imagine if it involved claiming to have done something that society labels monstrous and would call you a monster for doing.
That to me is just like the ultimate level of torture. Well, not really the ultimate level, but psychologically, right? Because, and I'm going through the same thing right now currently, just not being, the frustration of knowing you're right and not being believed, especially when it's happening with people who spend a whole lot of time with you and should know better. They should know your character. They should know you better than that. But yet they're still just, oh, well, nope, I've determined in my head that you're wrong, and they are just obstinate and refuse to listen. And it hurts on a different level because, you accept people into your life. And so it kind of hurts when you let that wall down and they go back behind you and just betray your trust in that way. So imagine, and that's just on a personal day-to-day level.
Right. Imagine everybody around you.
And the consequences of such are that you are then confined away from everyone, from everything you love, everything you know. If that wouldn't cause a psychological break, I don't know what else would.
You spent every day of that 17 years in an environment where he was surrounded by dangerous criminals. Right. He's in lockup with, to quote Arlo Guthrie, mother rapers and father stabbers, right? He's in lockup with people who have committed violent crimes. Right. Who have no compunctions against violence toward each other. And we know, historically, that when other inmates find out that your conviction is for a sex offense against a woman or a child, they engage in violence against you. Mm-hmm. So he had to watch his back all day, every day, for 17 years while maintaining his innocence. And for 17 years, he had to go periodically and sit in a room with some therapist who had determined that square one would be him saying, yes, I committed this crime. And that any progress he might make toward getting out before his sentence was up would be determined by him taking that first step. And so he'd be told every time he went in there, you have to accept this lie, and you have to repeat this lie about yourself. That is one of the most horrible things you could say about yourself. Or you're not getting out of here. Like, to stand up for the truth in that circumstance. To maintain your capability of recognizing your reality in the face of being told by everything around you and everyone around you, you are this monster who did this terrible thing. Like, that takes a lot of strength. And it would be 17 years of mental torture. So he says in this, further down in this story, the way he described it, when a jury finds you guilty when you are innocent, reality does not change. You know you did not commit the crime, but all the people around you start living in a false fantasy universe and treat you as if you are guilty. So that would be his fellow inmates, the prison guards, the staff at the prison where, he would have had a prison job and he would have had some sort of a job coach or a monitor on him. He would have had, any medical staff that he had to face, any staff that he had to deal with during any recreation time. If there's a library, if there's time out in a yard, anything that he got to do for relief of the monotony of prison, he would have had to deal with people thinking that he was guilty, treating him like a rapist. And of course, again, he would have had periodic episodes of therapy, periodic appointments with a therapist of some sort who would try to convince him to just accept that he was a rapist and come clean as a rapist and start the process of rehabilitating himself from being a rapist every time he met with that person. So, he'd be treated every day by multiple people all day as a guilty man. And now he says, I have finally been exonerated. I am left outside this court without an apology, without an explanation, jobless, homeless, expected to simply slip back into the world with no acknowledgement of the gaping hole they opened up in my life. A black hole that looms so large behind me that I fear it will swallow me up.
And so what recourse does he have? I mean, I was going to ask, because this was what I was thinking about the whole time, we were talking about this story. What is he going to do when does he have family that he can go and stay with? Like, I mean, the man is 57 years old. I don't hear them talk about his mother or his parents or, if that's like a viable option for him. But
his mother's mentioned further along in this article.
Okay.
But I don't know about her home situation.
Yeah.
If something like that happened in my family, we'd find a way to house the individual that it happened to while we were suing the shit out of the state.
Yeah.
And we would sue everything that was involved in that case and moved. Like, everybody but the victim, because the victim didn't point the finger at him.
Right.
His mother said, for nearly... Oh, I'm going to read more of what he said because this is heartbreaking and people should hear it. He said, people convicted of rape are the lowest of the low. I did not commit the crime, but I was treated as if I did. I spent 17 years on my guard against every threat. 17 years counting down the minutes to lock up so I could be behind my door, safe from other prisoners, but not safe from my own mind, imagining I would die there, perhaps murdered. But somehow I lived. His mother, Tricia Hose, said, for nearly 20 years, people have assumed that I was just a loyal but deluded mother in denial about what my son was capable of doing. I knew the system had got it wrong, but it seemed like there was nothing I could do about it. Now he had been cleared. Miss Hose said she was no longer a deluded mother and her son was no longer a monster, but what has been done to him cannot be undone, she said. The damage will be with him for the rest of his life. and the woman who got attacked has been denied justice, just as my son was. And, you know, and in one of the other stories, he expressed sympathy for that woman as well. And this is a consistent thing that I have seen with men who have been convicted wrongly of crimes that were committed by other men, where there was a perpetrator, there was a crime, they got the wrong guy. And these guys show compassion every time for the victim of the crime, despite everything they've been through. Where society doesn't have any compassion for these men. They talk about it like the woman, the victim of the crime has suffered, and her family has suffered, but they don't care about the suffering of this victim. This victim had 17 years of mental torture. This victim probably has post-traumatic stress disorder. I can't imagine coming out of this without post-traumatic stress disorder.
No way. Going into it or coming out of it. Jesus.
He has been made indigent and homeless, impoverished, and incapable of getting a job at this point, because who's going to hire somebody with a 17-year hole in their work history, especially when they come, well, I was in jail, you know, and then you have to go through the whole story of, well, I was wrongly convicted. And he wasn't even in the wrong place at the wrong time. People assume, you know, that you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's because you're doing something you shouldn't have been doing. He was working as a security guard. He wasn't even at the wrong place at the wrong time because of a stupid reason. So there was no... Okay, Derek, you don't understand PTSD. It doesn't necessarily mean that the trauma is over. It means that you have experienced trauma. It's a disorder that happens after trauma, but you can have PTSD and still be experiencing trauma at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
It is a trauma response, and it does continue after the initial incident that caused the trauma is over, but it is evidence that the trauma hasn't ended. That's I've dealt with that in a variety of ways in my own life, and watched people go through things that are similar to what this man has experienced. You can't say the trauma was over. You can say that the trauma has had its impact, has had its primary impact. But what this guy...
How do you stop that movie from replaying in your head? You know what I mean? It's like it's there every time you close your eyes, and it doesn't. I mean, I don't know if there are like pills that you can take that just make it stop. I highly doubt that, you know, and not that that's a good thing, because you don't want to become dependent on a substance like that. But the effects are very real and lasting, you know, and I agree with you, Hannah. It's just like you said, it's not just because you are diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, it doesn't mean that you cannot also then still be going through trauma, which then just compiles on top of it. And if your life is in a situation like this where you are homeless and you have no way of taking care of yourself, you're basically indigent, how do you function?
This is the thing. Homeless men are invisible in society. Yeah. And that's another whole issue for this man's situation. I hope his family is able to house him and care for him and provide for him while they figure out a way for him to get at least somewhat on his feet. The really challenging thing for an ex-con is, you know, you come out, you have no income, you have no prospects, right? If you are an ex-con who was guilty, or at least who was never exonerated after being found guilty. There are programs in most first world countries. There are programs to help you find work and become a law-abiding member of society. But if you are an ex-con who was exonerated, somebody who you didn't do anything wrong, and you don't have those programs. Those programs are for guys that actually did commit their crimes. So when the court spits a guy like this out after chewing him up for 17 years, they had nothing for him.
Yeah.
He's just spit out. There you go. We're sorry. We screwed up. Your whole life is over, but, So he has no recourse but to sue. He's going to have to file a lawsuit against the perpetrators of wrongdoing against him. He's going to have to convince the court that he has suffered enough and that he has been financially damaged enough to merit a high enough payment for him to live on for either for the rest of his life or until he can find a way to develop his own income. Write a book, go on a speaking tour, counsel other wrongly convicted men, whatever, he can actually get. Because...
Yeah, and that's if you have even, the gumption to get up out of bed and do something like that and take action, you know what I mean?
Right.
God...
And that's going to be in the midst of all of dealing with all of this.
Exactly. You put men in this situation and you wonder why suicide seems like not such a bad option,
Nope. So that's his situation now. And I do believe there is an ongoing lawsuit now. There should be. I do believe I read that he is filing a lawsuit, but there needs to be some sort of recourse, because if you kidnap and hold a person against their will as a citizen, if you just grab somebody off the street, stick them in a room, and treat them the way a prisoner is treated, you get years and years in prison.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
You get convicted and you get the book thrown at you. Society is afraid of you because you've committed violence against another person without cause. Why do we not have laws that say when our law enforcement deliberately manipulates evidence to deny justice to a wrongly accused person, and it's obvious that that's what they're doing, they're guilty of crime as well? Why do we not have laws that make that an imprisonable offense? If a prosecutor or a police officer, a detective, anyone involved in a case like that has the responsibility of managing state violence that the individual does not have a legal right to resist, doesn't have a legal right to defend himself against, if it's being inflicted and the state considers its infliction legitimate, if that individual takes measures to contravene the course of justice, to pervert the course of justice so that they are able to kidnap and wrongly imprison an individual, how are they not considered as malicious and dangerous to society as someone who would grab an individual off the street, drag them into their vehicle, hide them in a room somewhere, and abuse them for 17 years? That's my question.
It's because men do one thing and women do the other, I think, on the whole.
And the thing that men do is get sacrificed. Like, this man was sacrificed for a safety net.
it makes it all the more annoying that so many people nowadays talk about, women getting erased and women being sacrificed on the altar of what we are, I suppose, rightfully calling biological men. It always comes down to that.
Yeah. But how is this? How is this not an act of human sacrifice? Just this, you mean they might as well have thrown him into a volcano.
Well, men aren't human, so
Yeah.
it's not really a human sacrifice. It's a mystery meat sacrifice. We're just throwing some mystery meat into the volcano. We don't know what it is. All we know is it isn't woman. It isn't what we call woman.
Yeah, for the sake of one female victim who wasn't helped by this, and actually really just to placate society on behalf of society's outrage on behalf of one woman. We sacrifice a whole man, sacrifice like 17 years of his life in prison and another 3 on the outside of people thinking that he's guilty. So 20 years. 2/3 of a career of his life. It's just crazy if you ask me. And we
don't kill anyone,
No.
so there's no one's blood on our hands.
Not this time.
And what does it mean to ruin a life? He's fine. He can sit there in prison. He can write poetry to his heart's content.
Yeah. What this case makes me think of is, I don't know if you remember the Luke Harwood case. He was 18-year-old. And a girl accused him. She didn't accuse him to police. She accused him to her friends. And her sister led an attack on this guy. And she and I think 3 young men beat him to death. And then the accuser came out and said, I just made it up. Guys killed him. And went to police. And her sister and the men got arrested and convicted. Tried and convicted for beating Harwood to death. Harwood is dead. And the liar didn't face any repercussions at all. No legal repercussions at all, because she didn't lie to police. She just lied to people who would kill the guy that she pointed the finger at. She didn't tell them to go kill him. They just went off on their own and did it. So there wasn't anything to convict her of. But because she lied, an 18-year-old died, and 3 more young people were convicted of committing violent crimes that they had no business committing. Like that, and people don't consider this to be a serious thing. Oh, only 2%, they say, of false allegations, or of allegations are false. Well, we figured out, we learned, in the last few episodes of discussion, well, that's bullshit. We don't know that, and it's likely much higher, a much, much higher number. Right? This isn't even from the perspective of the victim a false allegation. This is only a false allegation from the perspective of the convicted. He was falsely accused. Not by her, but by another man. And yet, the repercussions against him, the repercussions that he dealt with, it doesn't matter if only 2% of allegations were false. If this is what happens as a result, it's too many.
Yeah. Jesus.
1/2 of 1% is too many. And obviously we should be taking much, much more seriously the criminal nature of the actions of state officials who deliberately manipulate cases to obtain a false conviction.
Right. And how much they actually care about life, and human rights. I mean, this is just disgusting. How do you look the other way?
Yeah.
How do you look the other way at people losing their entire life? This is like, you might as well just sentence him to death.
Yeah.
Because what kind of life is he going to have after this? And I'm not saying that he can't go on to lead a fulfilling life. You know what I mean? He could go on to do something great with his life. And that's the great thing about life. Because you have the chance, you have the opportunity to do something different than what you did before.
Right.
And this is the argument against the death penalty.
But he certainly shouldn't be forced by the state into a circumstance where he has to overcome something like this in order to live his life. Yeah.
No.
And so my thinking on this is if you're a state official and you deliberately manipulate a case to obtain a wrongful conviction, and it's provable that you knew that you were manipulating evidence to hide exculpatory evidence, to hide information that might sabotage a case against somebody who might not be guilty, you're deliberately perverting the court of justice, you should be subject to the same accountability that a civilian would. It should be just as much an arrestable and triable and convictable offense, a jailable offense, a fine offense, right? If you'd have to pay a fine as say perjury or lying to police during an investigation. Being the police and lying to the court during a hearing, whether it's through your own words or through hiding evidence, it shouldn't matter. It should get you into the same trouble that a citizen would get into if they did it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, given the current year, we're just living in a time of unprecedented corruption. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you look at what's going on with the resident's son, how can you not understand that there's a two-tiered justice system in this world? And if we can't hold everybody accountable to the same standard of justice, then there is no standard of justice except the one that you can pay for.
Yeah. Well, and if you're paying for it, it's not justice.
It's not justice, exactly.
It's fair to call it the injustice system at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And at the other end of the spectrum, then, we have another story that I'm going to look at. And I'm not entirely done with this, but I want to make a comparison. So, the excuse that we get for this kind of human sacrifice, where our society tolerates the kidnapping of an innocent man and imprisonment of this innocent man for almost 2 decades, the psychological torture of this innocent man for 2 decades. The excuse is a woman was victimized, right? Mm-hmm. A woman was traumatized, and our society needs recourse for this woman's trauma. And the trauma being that rape is the worst thing that could ever happen to you. I contest that because I think being murdered is worse. I think that there's been other things that I've been through that have been worse. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty good about being able to make the comparison considering my spectrum of experiences. But yeah, we have this narrative in society that just being raped is the worst thing that could ever happen to you, and it's so traumatic that it justifies. This guy should be happy to be the sacrifice for this woman's pain. Bullshit. In my opinion, it's utter bullshit. But that's the excuse that we're told. That we should spare no ire, no anger, no outrage when it comes to this type of crime, and we should pursue the criminal to the ends of the earth, and anybody that we think might be the criminal, and sacrifice the shit out of them, right? So what happens when the victim isn't a woman?
Crickets.
Yeah.
Crickets.
There's no such thing, surely.
So
we redefine what victim is.
Yeah.
To exclude male victims.
And that's what Ohio just did. I'm not kidding. And it's in the most egregious manner. The Ohio Supreme Court narrowed our standard for rape in response to a case involving a 2-year-old child.
I knew the story was coming, and I think I kind of mentally blocked out the fact that it's a 2-year-old child involved in this case, but I think there's no running from it because it probably says everything that we need to know about the actors involved.
Yeah. So here we just got done talking about how UK sacrifices, and the United States does this too. And we've talked about false allegations. We've talked about the sex offender registry. We've talked about a multitude of things, right? Where in regard to how accused men are treated when the victim is female, or when the accuser is female, even when there isn't a victim and it's just an accuser. Like, no recourse for the accused in that situation. No consideration. No ins and outs in the law. No due process. Nothing. Everybody is pretty much on the page of we're just going to destroy this person.
Yeah.
Right. In this story, this is an incredibly egregious story. This is just unbelievable. And then it's not just outrageous. It's just unbelievable. So this is Ohio woman's conviction of raping her son has been overturned. So the first sentence just throws me. An Ohio woman's conviction of raping her son. So this is a 2-year-old, right? And the Supreme Court looked at this incestuous rape of a 2-year-old by an adult woman who was his own mother, and said, well, it doesn't count. Doesn't count as a rape.
Is this the kind of thing that's going to be used for the argument for abortion? Like, you know what I mean? She should have just been able to kill the kid. Otherwise, she wouldn't have had to rape it and torture it to death.
Oh no, this is the excuse they used. See if this is familiar to you. Miranda Smith, 30, was charged with raping her 2-year-old son in 2019, even though she did not sexually penetrate him. Like, even though she did not sexually penetrate him, but had her son penetrate her. That's
you may
the
think we're
stipulation.
overreacting, folks, but this was the reason given for it not being rape.
Legally in Ohio, according to our Supreme Court now, being forcibly enveloped by your rapist doesn't count. It's not rape under the law.
Hannah, She was just trying to put him back in the backside way, right?
There we go.
Fucking hell. Why are women?
And not to overshadow Ohio, but there are entire nations over here in Western Europe, my own included, where this, as a matter of legal course, this is just how it works every time a woman rapes a child. Because there's no such thing as a woman raping a child.
Right.
We called it something else, so it's not.
Yeah. So here we are. Now we're in a situation where sexual contact that would be considered rape if it was done to a female is not considered rape because it was done to a male.
Meanwhile, if it was done by his father,
right,
we'd be having a whole other conversation right now.
Only if his father did it with his penis. If he did it with a rose bush or something, that would only be sexual assault. That's the difference, you see. You can put a chainsaw inside a child's most delicate bits, and it doesn't count as rape. Only a penis counts as rape. I can't speak for Ohio. I can only speak for my own country. But I can imagine that's how it would work. That's the difference between the most egregious form of sexual assault and what we call rape.
Is the introduction of a penis.
A penis is worse than a chainsaw, is how the law goes in instances like this.
So in this instance, this is again like I have a rough time with this. This is such a disgusting story.
Yeah.
But in this instance, this victim was made to penetrate with a sex toy and filmed. So she not only.
Oh my God.
Not only did she make this child interact with her genitalia in a completely sexual way, but she created child porn. Jesus. And sent it to her boyfriend. Was originally sentenced 10 years to life. Her attorney argued that she was guilty of gross sexual imposition under state law, but not rape, because she was the one that was penetrated and not the victim.
Oh my God.
Because our law basically determines that the victim must be penetrated. The penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina, anus, or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim. You could interpret this law, the penetration of a vagina,
from the outside, from the inside out.
Yeah.
Is that what you're about to do?
With any object,
without a baby forcing itself through a vagina from the inside out.
Did that baby consent to penetrating that vagina with that object?
Exactly.
Probably not, because he can't, right? 2 years old. 2-year-olds cannot consent. I mean, for fuck's sake, you can convince a 2-year-old that a fairy comes in through his window at night and takes his teeth out from underneath his pillow, right? And can't consent.
This is what happens when you give women the idea that their children are their property and not individual human beings of their own right. You know, just because you're the parent of that child doesn't mean that you can inflict whatever pain and suffering you think up in your mind, in your drug-addled, whatever, self-deluded mind. It's not an excuse.
No, it's not an excuse. But even if it wouldn't matter, if this woman thought it was an excuse. If this child was a girl, and the perpetrator had instead of forcing the child to use a sex toy to penetrate the adult, had penetrated the child with the sex toy, there would be no question. This article wouldn't exist. The case wouldn't exist. The child is still traumatized. The child is going to remember this. And the really horrible thing for this kid is this is the child's memories of his mother. Right? This is for the rest of his life he's going to be a person who was raped as a 2-year-old by his mother. And the state decided that it was okay.
Does it say how this came to light, like how this was found out?
This was I'm sure somebody found because she filmed the act and sent it to her boyfriend. I'm pretty sure, if I remember the initial.
It sounds like it would be because of his conviction that she got caught. So had that never happened, and if she was had some, if she just didn't do the fucking video, she probably would have gotten away for years with abusing this child, and no one would have ever known. And good Lord, how many times this has happened? I'm not going to say that this is like endemic of our society. It happens, but then these people have to go on and like try to function in society. They have to try to make sense of the world that their twisted mother forced them into because of all. It's just.
Yeah.
The psychological implications of what happens to these people, it goes on for years, and it doesn't just stop when the abuse stops.
We get a lot of these kind of stories on Honey Badger Radio, and bear in mind these are only the stories that have come to light.
Right.
And don't for a second think that you're getting anything but the tip of the iceberg when it comes to these stories.
Yeah.
If you hear about these, especially in the mainstream media, you're only hearing about the ones that cannot possibly be avoided. There is no telling just how often this happens, and it just slips completely under the radar. And society just has to deal with the individuals that this creates. Mm-hmm. And you can look to various sources to find what kind of individuals this whole business creates.
They're broken.
They're on TikTok doing the kind of thing you see on TikTok. I'm just going to put that out there.
Well, there is that. One of the things people fail to understand in regard to male victims and their futures is in the histories of male perpetrators as adults, there is a disproportionate representation of men who were victimized as children. And this is true also of female perpetrators. It's not the reason that you should care about male victims. But if someone were so callous that they didn't give a shit about their humanity, that they didn't give a shit about their childhood experiences, about their pain and suffering, and about their rights as individuals, their rights to their own boundaries, they should at least care about that. Meanwhile, I'm gonna plug somebody's channel here. He goes by K Valentine, CAE Valentine, like the holiday.
Yeah.
And you can find his channel on YouTube. If you can hack it, he talks a lot about female perpetrators and male victims. He's a male victim himself, and so he understands the experiences that a male victim goes through from the inside. And so when he talks about this, he's talking about this from the perspective of someone who has been victimized and understands fully exactly how damaging this is and how hard the recovery is. And so I definitely would recommend checking out his channel. And he's got a pretty good history of discussing these issues, and his focus is female perpetrators and society's tolerance for female perpetrators and false accusers and so on. So this is something that I would take a look at if you have more interest in knowing more and understanding more about female perpetration, male victim experiences, and so on. And again, that's CAE is the first name, and then Valentine is the second name, and it is a YouTube channel. And I know he's on Twitter, but Twitter keeps booting him, so I'm not sure if I have his current Twitter handle, but definitely check the YouTube channel out. And in fact, his most recent one is titled "Female Predators Insert Witty Title," because he's had so many of them, I think, that he's getting a little jaded on trying to come up with titles.
Yeah.
So, but in any case, the next thing I want to point out about this, because we've talked about the aspect of this as an egregious violation of the child's rights and the fact that this mother is getting away with this horrendous crime, but the ruling has more far-flung implications than just this one case. The Ohio Supreme Court's unanimous February 2 decision determined that although Smith's actions were grounds for a charge of gross sexual imposition, they technically do not constitute rape as defined by state law, according to Dan Trevis of Court News, Ohio. And this is the significant part. A conviction for rape requires evidence that the accused inserted a body part or object into another person, not that the accused compelled another to insert a body part or object into the accused. So that means that any rape that involves forcing to penetrate, whether it's with a sex toy, with a penis, with a finger, regardless, with a tongue, regardless, doesn't count as rape. So anytime a female perpetrator forces fellatio unwanted on a male victim, or coitus unwanted on a male victim, or anal sex on her unwanted on a male victim, they will not count that as rape.
Even garden shears. Even if you take a pair of garden shears to a man's John Thomas,
they will not count that as rape.
That doesn't count as rape. It's just envelopment. There's penetration going on, but it's a different kind of penetration. It's not like a stick going into a hole. It's like a very sharp piece of metal going into a penis. And Lord knows that's long since not been illegal. I guess you'll know what I'm talking about.
Right. And they would call it mutilation, at least. The court agreed with Smith's argument about the legal distinction and ruled that the court could modify its judgment to reflect that Smith is guilty of gross sexual imposition, both the legal meaning and the normal meaning of the term gross, without scheduling another trial. The lesser offense of gross sexual imposition could reduce Smith's sentencing. So her minimum sentence was 10 years if it was rape. So her minimum sentence could be less than 10 years because it's gross sexual imposition. She forced a child to sexually penetrate her with an object, created child porn, and distributed child porn. And she might get less than 10 years because the victim was not a girl. So, of course, victims advocates are outraged. Amy Dudley, the director of YWCA Dayton's Center for Survivors of Sexual Violence, said that the fact that child sex crime survivors' trauma affects far into adulthood and may cause more issues than the initial abuse. If we can say that a 2-year-old was complicit in Smith's sexual conduct, what does that say for other survivors? Dudley said to the Ohio Capitol Journal. And I agree. Even if this wasn't a child, though, if this was an adult man and she put a gun to his head and made him use a sex toy on her, they would call it gross sexual imposition. Like, she could put a gun to somebody's head and completely override their ability to refuse, and they would still call it gross sexual imposition.
Disgusting.
So that's the article. What I want to do with this is I'm going to start working on communications to my representatives here, because I'm in Ohio, and I've done this before where I've written to representatives, written to the governor, written to the state attorney general. Want to initiate a campaign to get the law rewritten to include victims who are forced to penetrate, so that it will count as rape under the law regardless of the sex of the victim when a perpetrator imposes sexual contact against the victim's will. So next week I'll have a rough draft, and the episode that we'll do next week will be going over that rough draft and calling for suggestions for wording, and then we'll start contacting representatives. Yeah, Tree Surgeon. Simple letter, dear representatives. What the fuck is wrong with you? I'm hoping, because our governor is I would call him an authoritarian traditionalist conservative if I was going to categorize him. He's very accountability minded in terms of the behavior of violent criminals. So he's somebody that's probably going to listen if he's given information about the experiences of victims. And I may see if we can get some people from our audience who have been victimized to write to Ohio's representatives and see if we can persuade them that the law should be changed. So, I am going to probably call it here, though, as far as the show. I think we've pretty much covered everything that I wanted to talk about this week. So let's see. Last super chat I read that one. Xeranx gave us $5 and said the Supreme Court invoked the Whoopi Goldberg defense. I'm not sure I'm familiar with that one.
Yeah, what is that?
I don't know. Meredith G in the Super Chows, Meredith G gave us $5 and said HBR Talk 271, honey for the Badgers. Thanks for the great conversation. Nihilistic Aussie gave us $100 and then $50, and I had a moment there where I'm like, that's not what it looks like, because they're right together and there's not another dollar sign. So I'm like, that's a big number. But fortunately, no. So few people actually give a damn about men in the world. Hope this helps to keep you going, and it will. And thank you very much. Then we have Fuck the police. Free Eric Brandt gave us $5 and said, police are not your friend. They're not there to protect and serve. Supreme Court's already ruled twice that police have no obligation to protect the public. That is true. And then he says, Google Castle Rock versus Gonzalez. Police are there to generate, i.e. steal money from the public and to fund themselves, prosecutors, judges, and the for-profit prison complex. They have quotas and they will do whatever they can to meet those quotas. Despite taking an oath to uphold the Constitution, you'll commonly find them doing the opposite because following orders is above the Constitution, above our amendments, and if they're found guilty of violating our rights, murdering us, and committing brutality on us, lying on police reports, etc., they're given a paid vacation, slap on the wrist, and we the taxpayers have to pay for the settlement. We pay for their crimes, but for the rare times they are convicted and sent to prison, they're sent to the nicer and safer prisons, and they receive lenient sentencing compared to what the public would receive if we committed the same crime. Honestly, they kind of remind me of feminists. And that's probably because a significant portion of their training is written by feminists. I suggest watching videos of police violating our rights. The issue with police are the people being hired, the police unions, psych evaluation, the training, qualified immunity, the militarization, and on top of that, they're not held accountable, and we all know what happens when you don't hold people accountable. Bareback the blue, stop swallowing the thin blue pill. Subscribe to Lackluster, Here's the Deal, San Joaquin Valley Transparency, James Freeman, and Delete Laws. So that's all one super chow. Richard Bier gave us $5 and said, there is an Air Force study that found that the rate of false allegations was as high as 60%. The 2% figures that is bandied about is the number of allegations where the accuser openly admits to lying about the accusations. And that's true as well. And there are some studies that indicate that the number might be as high as in the 90s. We found that during our look at various studies. And then the other thing is, in terms of allegations, there's the set of allegations where there is a conviction, and some of those turn out to be false. And then there is the set of allegations, that's a small set, by the way, of convictions, and some of those turn out to be false. There is a small set of acquittals. And then there is the grand, undiagnosed, or undetermined middle, where we don't have an outcome in the court because for various reasons it doesn't make it to court. The police don't find enough evidence to send it to court. The accuser doesn't cooperate, or it's determined to not be a credible allegation, whatever the reason. And frankly, I agree with John Davis that says if the police couldn't find enough evidence, chances are it's because the allegation is false. If somebody goes to police with an allegation and no evidence, chances are they have made it up. But that's not to say that we can call it that as determined 100% false. But it is outrageous that feminists treat them as true allegations when they talk about that. Let's see, Richard Bier. Oh, I got that one. Xerinx gave us $5 and said the following is dark. Since this is in the news, would it open the door to investigating backgrounds of violators if this 2-year-old grows up to become a perpetrator? I understand that he would be another sacrifice in that scenario. It's already been that's already been investigated. That kind of stuff has already been investigated. What really needs to happen is when we have a case like this, where we have a known victim that has been through an obvious profound trauma, the caregivers in the situation, the physicians, the parents, or in this situation it's going to be foster parents. The state is unfortunately going to be heavily involved in this kid's life because, I don't know if her boyfriend, I doubt her boyfriend was the child's father, but if she was able to do this, if I remember right, the child's father is not in his life. They need to recognize that when children are abused in this manner, their boundaries, their ability to recognize their own personal boundaries and establish and communicate and defend them, and their ability to recognize other people's personal boundaries and respect and accommodate them becomes compromised. That becomes damaged, right? And if the child grows up in an environment that is scary and violent, where he doesn't learn how to establish trust, and he doesn't relearn how to navigate his own personal boundaries and the personal boundaries of the people around him, then he becomes one of two things. He either becomes a perpetrator or polyvictim. I didn't know the term polyvictim till I started reading feminist literature on it, and once upon a time I would have said this is not legit. But I have to think about it. I count as one, and when I look back at my situation and my experiences, I didn't grow up in an environment where I had no lessons on other people's boundaries. I had plenty of lessons on other people's boundaries growing up, but defending my own, I didn't get a grasp on that, and it became a reason why I failed multiple times to defend my own. So when a kid is victimized and adults know about it, it's important for the adults to gear the child's recovery process to redevelop that so that the child will be protected against learning a dysfunctional way of interacting with other people, either becoming a violent criminal or becoming essentially a serial victim until they learn at some point to defend themselves later in their life the hard way, through the school of self-inflicted hard knocks. And both are bad pathways, and both are preventable pathways. But in our society, we get so focused, and it's not wrong to have outrage toward people like this mother, or people like false accusers, or the actual rapist in the previous story. Like, it's not wrong to have outrage toward those people. It's just wrong that that's our primary focus when there is somebody whose recovery needs facilitated, right? And where there's a justice system that needs to be very carefully monitored. And we need to make sure that we're handling every aspect of these incidents, these criminal incidents, to the best of our ability to be just toward the perpetrators and the victims, and to provide the victims with effective recovery instead of just a sacrifice. So I would hope that the people who are in this child's life will do everything they can to prevent him from going down either one of those two paths as an adult, and help him recover as best he possibly can from this, and have as normal of a life as he can. You know, that's my hope. And in terms of studying the histories of perpetrators, we have that information. What needs to happen is it needs to be acted on. You guys have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, no, here, as I believe is said.
Yes.
Good. I'm going to probably take us out of the show then. I think there's no... I don't see, anyway, any super rumbles. There's not a actual name for that. Just a few people commenting that they were early and hitting the thumbs up button. So... with that, thanks everybody for listening. This was a tough one to listen to, I know, and a tough one to discuss. And thanks to everybody, who works in the background to make HBR Talk happen. Thanks you guys for coming on to discuss this with me. This really was a tough one to discuss. And good night, all.
Good night, y'all.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.